Hello everyone, good afternoon. It's Tuesday, it's 3 p.m. or 3 and 01, and we are ready to kick off the third episode of Wireless Workbench Seminar today. Today we are discussing about we enter frequency coordination world, and we will be discussing about the spectrum and how this is affecting our frequency coordination. I hope my audio is good, you can hear me clear and loud. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please keep your microphones all muted, and if you have any question, there is a chat page on the right side of your screen. I'll try to collect the questions all over the webinar and answer them at the end of it, so we can make sure that all the questions get answered if they are not answered already during the seminar. And if you have additional questions that are not related to the topic of today, you can send them to me and to our amazing team that's always supporting us, marketing, who's sending all the email and reminders around. You can send together with the registration email. There is a form where you can apply all the questions that you like that are not related to the topic of the day. About it, I received more than one question about Shure and Dante. Of course, this is a wireless workbench webinar, so we are not really discussing much of audio. But I really think that this is a very important topic, and therefore shortly we will announce a session, maybe in a kind of couple of weeks from now. We still didn't identify the right day, around 20th of April, with Augusto, who's technical manager at Ordinate, and he will help us find out all the tips and tricks about Dante and how to use Dante efficiently and effectively and safely in our setup with Shure network devices. So let's start diving into frequency coordination page. We already saw it's divided in two parts. One part is related to the spectrum, and the second one is related more related to the devices that we want to coordinate. So, sorry, I have a window here that's a little bit annoying, so I remove it. I have two laptops, and I'm always getting confused where I should work. So here I have my online inventory, and here I have my frequency coordination page. On the left side, we have three ways to import scans in the software. So we have, as we saw, we have a live one. In this case, I will run a scan with XT600, and of course, this is, I think, the best tool to use whenever it's available, because it's giving us the view from the point of view of our antenna. So what our receiving antennas are really seeing. This is very good for mics, but might not be the best way for the in-ear monitors. Now I'm using the antennas. Okay, I'm pretending to use the antennas connected to my setup. Of course, in this living room setup, it's all a little bit limited, and I have just two antennas sticked in the back of the Spectrum Manager. But in a real life, the scan most likely would be taken from the same antennas that are running, where our microphones are running. This is very efficient, in my opinion, for microphones, but may not be so efficient for in-ear monitors, because in-ear monitors are having a different point of view. The receiver is with the artist on stage, and the RF environment might be different. Whenever we talk about RF, we talk about scans, we have a view at a certain point, in a certain point in the space, at a certain point in time, that may not be the same, like even just a few meters away, or with different antennas, or with a different setup of any kind. So we always need to bear in mind that what we see might not be exactly the same thing that our antennas are seeing if they are in a different place. As you already know, Dubai has a very forgiving spectrum, so here it looks kind of clean. And for this reason, for our exercises today, we will be using some other scans that I collected around some different gigs in some different places. Here we have a plot properties on the opposites in the right side of the screen. So what we are looking at. If I'm not mistaken, okay, let me just double check. Okay, we can see from 30 megahertz to 2 gigahertz in this plot, and this is helpful to accommodate scans that are including portion of spectrums that are not covered by the spectrum manager. So in case you have a, I don't know, TTI, Cadman Creation, whatever, you name it, RF Explorer, you may be able to see a wider portion of spectrum, and the wireless Workbench can accommodate it. It can be helpful to see the area immediately below 470, because it's a portion of spectrum where we may have a lot of walkie-talkies, and they can have an impact on our setup. Now, without going too much in details, these devices are usually powerful, sometimes much more powerful than our devices. If we talk milliwatt for our microphones and in-ear monitors, they can easily talk watts, 5 to 10. It depends. We may have, if we are using VHF devices, we may have devices not far from our receivers that are, again, 5, 10, 50 watts. They may be used in big ceremonies. A lot of effort is put to coordinate mass cast, and this requires a lot of FM receivers that are broadcasting pretty loud usually, and in an area where mostly it's a lower VHF than we may use. In this setup today, we just have UHF, and we will be looking at it. Here we see the portion of spectrum that we are looking into. So 470, 952, because this is the area covered by the spectrum manager, but I may not be interested in the upper part of it, so I may decide that I want to look at only 470, 700, that anyway is what is allowed to use for wireless microphone, and I want to have more focus on what I see. Center is exactly the center of our view, and the span is how wide our view is at this point. These two values, so start and end, center and span, are all related to us. So changing one of it, you will change the others. So if you reduce the span, let's say to 210, you see that now you lost the first. I reduced by 20 meg. I lost the first 10 and the last 10 megahertz around. Here we have two values that we can change, expressed in dBm. First one I want to talk about is exclusion threshold. Exclusion threshold is the threshold above which we do not put frequencies on. Better, Wireless Workbench is not considering to use any frequency that has an energy level over the exclusion threshold. This is something I can change. So I can, let's say, put -90, and if resolution is good enough, you may see that a new blue line appeared here, because this is above -90, so but not above -85. What do we do in the practical side when we change this threshold? We are considering that in case we need more range, we want the threshold to be lower. We all know that wireless is all about signal-to-noise ratio, so if we reduce the accepted level of noise, we'll have a better ratio with our transmitter, therefore we will have a bigger range. But of course, sometimes this is not possible because we may not have enough frequencies for our coordination, so we may need to compromise. In a situation like this beautiful scan that we have here in JLT, I think I can go easily -95 and still have plenty of spectrum to play with. But if we look at some other scans, that's not the case. Other information that we see are the TV channels that are considered the primary exclusion, and we'll have a quick chat about TV channels. Additional exclusions are the exclusions created by the software according to the scan that is active. Then we have user and inclusion groups that we will treat extensively in the next episode. Then we have markers for our devices, primary frequency markers and backup frequency markers. Again, it's something we want to see in some occasion, but we may not love to see backup frequencies when we have maybe 20 microphones and 60 backup frequencies available. Backup frequencies are just confusing for us. We can decide what the color marker is. You remember I was talking about colors in the property window. This is exactly where color can become handy, because if I set up correctly my color, I will clearly see my microphone on the scan and where they are placed in the available spectrum. We may have TV channels or DAB channels. DAB is digital audio broadcast, and it's below the TV channels region, the UHF. It's usually in the it's not in the UHF. It's usually in the VHF area. At this point, I don't have much here going on, so I need to simulate that I'm somewhere else. In the spectrum, here I have no TV channels to be avoided, but I can decide that I want to avoid certain channels for whatever reason. So I can manually do it, or I can work with in a different way if I'm in one of the countries listed here. Why we only have these countries and we don't have United Arab Emirates, an example? Because United Arab Emirates do not have a TV channels allocation. There is no TV broadcasting in UHF. Therefore, there is nothing to list about UAE. Other countries have TV channels, but they do not have a public database of repeaters, or this database it's not accessible, or it's not accurate. Therefore, we didn't include it in Wireless Workbench. Few countries that belong to my area. One is Turkey, the other one is South Africa. Sorry to say, both of them have kind of poor spectrum management, so the data you can find here may not be 100% accurate or up to date. But that said, You may think that United States is much better. Absolutely not. With repackaging, they live in the same condition. United States has a very specific feature in wireless Workbench. So that if you are connected to internet, you may grab data from a live database that is consistently updated, and even if it's updated consistently, may not be accurate in this moment because they are moving TV channels around. So for the sake of the exercise, I'll pretend to be in Italy, and I will set up a postal code that happens to be the postal code of a neighborhood I've been growing in. So I decide what is my city. That, for who cares, is Genova. Wow, we have a lot of city in this. And if I didn't crash the software, but I may have, I will receive a list of channels. Lovely. Okay, sorry guys. No, perhaps it worked. As you can see, I do not have the light on here, online frequency finder database, because this is only for United States for the time being. And so I can search for TV channels in this region. Here, I have a complete list of all the TV channels that might be busy. As you can see, I chose Italy on purpose, and I knew that this would have been the result because it's one of the most crowded environments. So if I save it, I find myself completely out of space. Why am I'm doing this? Just to tell you that this database can be a starting point, but that doesn't automatically mean that once I go on site in this specific location, this is what I really see. Some TV channels might be there, some others may not be received in the position where I'm actually placing my antennas. If you look here, I have a radius, so I can reduce this radius and check only on TV channels that are closer to my place. So instead of 50 kilometers, I select 5 only. It gets a little better. Not too much, but it's already something. This information, it's a starting point. When I go on site and I really run a scan, I can find that some of these TV channels are not really broadcasting in my direction, are not really received where I am actually. So do not stress yourself. Stress yourself a little bit if you see a scan like that, because the environment is going to be tough for sure. But not too much. I mean, be aware that it doesn't automatically mean that all the TV channels will really be busy where you go there. It just means that you have a lot of activity around your venue, and this is something you should take care about. In this condition, the software will use only certain frequencies because all the busy TV channels are excluded. I can decide, oh no, but I don't see any activity on channel 29, and include it in my coordination. Oh, channel 32, yeah, it looks free. I can include channel 32 and then free up some more space. Now, because my home market is UAE, I'm so used not to have TV channels around. I find it's really beautiful, but this is the reality in many of the places where I go. You really have a few channels to deal with. This setting is related to something that is in the preferences. So if I go to preferences and coordination, I have here a value, minimum spacing from leading edge of a TV channel. So I can decide, I think by default this is 100 kilohertz. So this is what I want to keep usually, 100 kilohertz from an occupied TV channel and my first frequency. Probably is a little narrow, probably not. Of course, the software will try to do its best to stay away from TV channels, not to be too close to TV channels. And at the end of a coordination, when all the frequencies will be ranked with a 3, 2, or 1 star, this is a parameter that will be anyway taken in consideration. Therefore, it will try to keep you away from the TV channels anyway. There are other places like Japan where by law you need to stay 1 megahertz away. That means 1000 kilohertz. In that case, this is a parameter you want to use. While we are here and we talk about coordination, I just want to tell you a little story that I heard from Ike Simbel, who's a Canadian frequency coordinator, very experienced, and he was telling me that during his young age, back in the end of 90s, early 2000, the first software he has been dealing with was DOS-based software where you had to include manually every frequency, and the software was telling you if it was compatible or not. So it was working kind of the opposite of what Wireless Workbench does nowadays. So Wireless Workbench is telling us what frequencies are good. But back in the days, the first software didn't work like that. You had to put a frequency and the system was telling you, okay, it's good, it's not. Of course, it was working in a scenario where most of the devices had 1, 2, maximum 8 available frequencies. So it was a different time. But what the software does in the background, it's still the same thing. Asking itself, oh, is this frequency good? Yes, no. Is this frequency good? Yes, no. And then it decides. Create a scenario, and then in case the scenario is not satisfying the conditions we put in the beginning, creates a new scenario and check that all the frequencies are compatible. How many times? Can be done 10,000 times. This is the default setting, and it stops trying after 5,000 fruitless experiment. So this can be a concern when we are really in a rush. I usually these are the default settings. I sometimes decide to reduce these numbers when I'm doing training, but as we see, there is no need actually to change it because we can stop the calculation whenever we want. So let's save it. We are clean again. We don't have any TV channel for the time being. Another thing that I think it's very important is in this moment I will import a little more realistic scan. This is Lagos. I use it a lot because I think it's really, first of all, because it's a real life scenario and it has a lot of different things going on here. While I was doing an experiment, I changed something and now I want to go back. So just give me 1 second. Okay, pretend you didn't see it, so you will listen to the full explanation. So first of all, 470, 690 is my spectrum and it's what I want to view. But in this moment, for this exercise, I want to focus a little more. Of course, you can change the parameters using your mouse and moving on and changing the dimension of the window up here. The only thing, it's not always very precise and very easy to be precise. Okay, so in this moment, this is my scenario. I have clearly one TV channel here that is busy, and I can decide in this moment to exclude it completely, so it will get red, and I will have my 100 kilohertz guard band. Same for channel 28, it's clearly busy, so I decide to exclude it. Same 30, same 31, and so on and so forth. The other thing, but now let's imagine that I need to calculate the frequencies for PSM 1000, G10, 32 frequency. Now, maybe in these exercises we won't always reach our target. Actually, this is the case, so let me change it. In this moment, I'm not putting much focus on what's going on the lower portion of the screen. We'll have a dedicated, we'll spend some time on it. On the third episode about frequency coordination in a couple of weeks from now. So let's assume that I have 16 channels of G10. I instead of importing them from an inventory, I decided to just add these frequencies to be faster. And so the first thing I want to do is to calculate these frequencies, and I get only out frequencies. I get 8 frequencies out of 16 that I requested. Now it's 9, and now it's doing all its experiments, all the passes and the experiments, to try to find a combination of frequencies that will give me more than 9 frequencies. But it's unlikely that I succeed, and definitely when it starts, like when after few seconds you don't have all your frequencies, it means that most likely it's not gonna make it. Now, the first thing you may want to do is just the most common thing is just set up here more frequencies. Yes, this is something you can do, but I want now to focus on something else. As you can see, the scan I imported created a list of exclusion frequencies. So what happened is that the software excluded some frequencies, but it has some criteria. So I can see it here. When I go to additional exclusion, I see all the frequencies that are somehow not usable, and I see some ranges as well. So ranges of frequencies, some of them are extremely narrow. Some other are a little more wide, maybe up to 8 megahertz because they are TV channels and whatnot. Here is the moment where our scan peak threshold enters into the game. All the frequencies that have energy above minus 60 dBm, they are treated differently. They are not just excluded, but we consider that they could be something to worry about more than just exclusion. One of the things about frequency coordination and frequency management is that we want to be good neighbors. So it's not only that we want to protect our own setup, we also want to be careful with the setup that may be happening next door. We are all colleagues and we don't want to make our life complicated. So if possible, we try to treat them nicely. In general, the software is also giving the most conservative and less aggressive configuration in the beginning. If you want to be more aggressive, then you need to know what you are dealing with. What happens here, if you, I don't know how good is the video, but I think enough. Here on top, where my cursor is, we have some little diamonds. These diamonds are telling me things that are relevant. So this one, in example, is a generic device, IMD wideband. What does it mean? It means that, let's look a little more in detail at the frequencies. This thing may look like an active carrier. An active carrier might be a microphone, right? So we want to make sure that our devices are not stepping on that microphone too badly. Plus, with this specific setting, we also make sure that if they can produce intermodulation with our microphones, this is taken into consideration. Now, let's imagine that these devices are not sources of intermodulation because they are away from us, but they are just used in the next ballroom. So in this scenario, I can change the profile of the interference, let's say, of this signal. I can change it in 4 ways, even though I think only 3 are really useful on a day-by-day operation. Generic device that can create intermodulation means something that is around us and can get extremely close to our microphones or to our antennas, that close that it can produce intermodulation. The other possibility is that I know it's a device. I don't know which device is it, but I'm pretty confident there is no intermodulation happening between my device and this carrier. Another option is to treat it as a generic exclusion, with or without intermodulation. Plus, in case I know what this specific carrier is, I can use a custom profile that is one of the devices that I have in my database. Okay? So if I know that here I have a UHFR on a G1 band, because that only G1 can be in this portion of spectrum, I can say, okay, this is a UHFR, treat it as a UHFR. Now, but let's assume that I know all these devices are unknown devices, generic devices of a show happening in the next ballroom in my hotel. I can also change them altogether. As I said, by default, every signal, every carrier, every peak over my my scan peak threshold will be treated as a generic device, but I can change it and, an example, saying generic device, but no intermodulation happening. Now I save it, I do my calculation again, and I have 15 frequencies available, while before, now 16, I'm all green. So while before I was having only 9. So you understand that this is making a big difference in our calculation, because in this case I know that the devices will not intermodulate with my setup, and I instruct the software to stay away from them, but not too much. If you're curious, I hope you are, we can see exactly what are the settings of the generic device in the different mode. So in this case, with the generic device, I give 800 kilohertz spacing. Doesn't matter, of course, I cannot coordinate them, so in all the 3 modes, they will be the same, can be more robust, standard, or more frequencies. So what I do is to give a very big space to these devices, and I stay very far away from them. But if I go to generic device with no intermod, of course, the parameters, it's the same. I just remove the intermod source box here, and therefore my spacing for the intermodulation products won't be calculated. If I set up a generic exclusion, what happens is that I stay away from there, but I don't give this 800 kilohertz spacing. in this case, I'm taking into consideration that these carriers can still intermodulate with me, and otherwise they cannot. And you can see how it's affecting your coordination when you don't have many frequencies free and available. So this is a small, I'd say, small setting. It doesn't look very big. That will prevent you to create problems to yourself. Meaning that if you go into more aggressive mode here, because you are afraid to intermodulate with something you cannot intermodulate with, you may run into other issues. One of them is, and generally it's a less precise coordination. So this is what this type of setting can do to your coordination. Like, you need to take them into consideration and treat them accordingly to the best of your knowledge. So if you don't have devices around you, you may keep the channel spacing because you can still affect them, and we want to be good neighbors, but pick out the intermodulation. Otherwise, you may decide that they are exclusions, but you don't know where they are physically. Therefore, okay, you don't give the spacing, but you take in consideration intermodulation products. Okay, I received a question that is I received two questions actually. One, I hope it's already answered. Yes, you can, the question was if I can multi-select peaks. Yes, you can, and you can select all of them either. Direct message, okay. How would you know if a device is IMD or no IMD? That's very much depending if I know it's around me or not. How can I, for a device that I don't know where it is, physically decide if it's can have intermod or not? The best thing to do might be trying to identify it. So using the directional antenna, try to find out the direction, and then have an educated guess. There is one more thing that I think it's worth showing in the preferences. Coordination page again. What if one of these peaks is within an excluded TV channel? Should I really be protective with it or not? My answer is most of the times you don't need to be protective, because they are shooting from very big distances with much higher power than we do. So if there is a peak into an excluded TV channel, you may decide to ignore it as a peak and just stay away from the TV channel. And that's it. I wasn't able to change profiles while multi-selecting peaks. You can change them one at a time, or you can change them all together. You can change, let's say, 4 of them just with a shift and select multiple, I guess. So if you select one, and you cannot select another one. But you can change all of them together at the same time. This is how we visualize exclusion threshold. There is a scan, that's a more graphic way, or a tab where we have all our frequencies excluded. The level of energy, it's stated here, and this is what's making our coordination effective for the place where we actually are. Of course, we can decide to import exclusion list, or we can decide to export to a file our exclusion list. This can be helpful when the scans are not compatible. From software to software, you may need in certain case to change the comma with a dot or vice versa to have multiple softwares speaking the same language, but we don't go there yet. So I hope the exclusion part, the scan peak threshold thing is clear to everyone. And this episode is of training is the only one that will not be repeated on Sunday because it's Easter. So, you're very lucky being here. If you have any question about any of this specific topic or any experience you want to share, this is a perfect moment to type it in your chat window. Next time we'll see a little more in detail. In this time we saw where we don't want our frequencies to be. The next time we'll see what we can do to have our frequencies in certain places, and generally we'll perform the very first official frequency coordination in this webinar. And we'll try as well to see how this frequency coordination can be related and can be visualized in this format. But I think it's particularly helpful because lets us have a visualization of what we can usually not see. Could I share my sample scan file for practice? Yes, I can, but as I think was Pasi mentioning it, there is a lot of database where you can access a scan, and I promise that with the next reminder email that you will receive, you will get some links. I can put something online, or you can access something that is already online, and try to play a little bit with real life scenario that I think is really useful. When on a stage, where are the best places to take scans for microphones and in-ear monitors? Ho, 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 ho. I promised myself I didn't really want to go in frequency coordination technique. I wanted to keep the goal of the training about how to use wireless Workbench for your own goals, but I'm having too much fun talking about it. So I'll give you an opinion that it's not Shure opinion, and definitely it's just one opinion. You can play with it, but how I do, I try to gather as many information as I can. So for microphones, my favorite place is the antennas that I use for the setup, and possibly I like to have exactly the same cabling, the same distributor, to see exactly what my receivers will see. The same thing is happening with the in-ear monitors. Now, assume that I have PSM 1000, that's helping me, because I can take a scan with the very same device that my talent will be using, and import in wireless Workbench and see it in the same window together with the other scans that I may have collected during the day. If I don't have a luxury to have PSM 1000, I have other like PSM 900 or 300, and I can have multiple antennas, or let's say I only have a spectrum manager and PSM 900 or any other device for whatever, as long as it's in the same band. A good solution is to bring an omnidirectional antenna, put it at the center of a stage, and see what the antennas will be seen from that point. That's just an opinion. I know that there are other techniques. Someone doesn't really like to use the antennas that are in use for the show, and prefers, even for microphones, to have a scan with omnidirectional. That's making absolutely sense because omnidirectionals are showing us the worst case scenario. So another trick that I learned from someone who's very good is to use one antenna from the setup and the second antenna an omnidirectional, so I have a view of both scenarios, like the real life and the worst case scenario. This is also depending on how your environment is. What I recommend, and on this it's not an opinion, or at least it's a very strong one, do not rely on a single source of information in a single moment. Try to gather as many information as you can, as many information as you can process as well. So depending on your skills and your setup, on what's really needed, you have a chance to gather multiple information, go for them. If you can have 10, 10 is good. If you can have 20, 20 is better. Another thing is the time. Do not check only once. If you go on a setup, you reach 10 a.m., at 12, your control room monitor booth is ready, you take a scan, and then you don't scan anymore for the whole day. Probably this is not the best way to do stuff. You take the first scan at 12, and then you go for lunch, and eventually you can let the device run, come back from lunch, while lightings are on, the LED screens are on, maybe the first wireless walkies are coming in, but maybe there is no security. You take another scan, and then you take again a scan when maybe security comes in. That's very much depending also on the type of event you're running, but generally take as many scans as you can, as many times as you can. If you can have a frequency plot running for 24 hours, even better. Of course, you will gather more information, you will see a very bad case scenario, but your coordination will be safer. So I hope this was helpful. I don't see any other question related to the scanning and how to visualize the exclusion. So get ready for, oh yes. Is it possible to combine scans done in different times in the same place? Of course it is. In this case, I'm using a live one and a non-live one. So I'm using the one that I just took with my XT600 plus the one I took in Lagos in 2018. So yes, you can have multiple scans at the same time. Some of them will be saved, and some other will be live eventually. But yes, of course, you can add multiple scans. As you can see here, if I add if I do not have the XT600 live scanning, I have some space here, but if I had this scanning, all this region goes blue, that means exclusion. So yes, you can have a morning scan and an evening scan, as well as you can have as I said, you can keep the scanning going on as much as you want. Of course, if you are scanning with a Spectrum Manager, you can use it as long as you don't need it as a backup frequency database for accent, analog or digital. And if you are using a receiver, you can scan with the receiver as long as you don't need it to actually work as a receiver for a microphone. So yes, the more you scan, the better, the more accurate the information you give to the software, the more accurate your frequency coordination will be. So I hope it was clear for today. In this weird time, sounds strange, but I hope you can somehow enjoy your Easter, and as well as I hope I can see you here again in 1 week from now, next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Thank you very much for joining, and I promise I will try to remember that you asked me for scan databases, and I will link some of them in the next email that you will receive. Thank you very much, and see you as soon as possible. Bye, guys.